we are, well, we're good to go. We have our agenda here, and we're going to keep on moving. But we are aware of it. There's nothing we can do about it, and yeah, we're all happy to be together. All right, so our next session, or our next presentation, is our still somewhat new ArchivesSpace technical lead, Thimios Dimopulos. I'm going to say it wrong, Dimopulos, and he is going to be presenting on creating actionable feature requests in ArchivesSpace. A major part of the interaction between users, developers, and testers of ArchivesSpace happens through feature requests. In this session, we will talk about what makes an actionable feature request and introduce behavior scenarios as a way to describe features. Take it away, Thimios.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Jessica, for the introduction. Very much related to the previous session and in the subject of requirements and requirement specification. I will talk about our Jira feature requests and some ideas about how to make them more actionable, and including introducing the concept of behavior scenarios as a way to describe new features. So what makes a feature request actionable? Generally being short and to the point is a virtue always. Being unambiguous and easy to comprehend is also something that helps. And being complete in the sense of leaving no open questions and providing detailed information. Asking ourselves why bother? Actionable feature requests are generally more easily reviewed during prioritization, so they are actually more likely to be prioritized for development. They should be also making the communication between the people involved more effective. And they should also be capturing the accumulated knowledge that we gather during discussing a feature about a specific feature for future reference. So feature requests on Jira are actually the places where three kinds of people meet and communicate on a topic. There are the users, the people who understand the everyday workflows within libraries and archives that ArchivesSpace supports, and they are in need of a specific functionality that is not yet supported, therefore submitting and talking about a feature request. There are the developers, who are the people who need to comprehend the requirement, understand the feature, and translate it to actual programming code in the ArchivesSpace system. And there is also the testers, the people who are there to verify that the requirement is fulfilled, therefore verify the acceptance criteria, as we say. We can assume that all those people involved have a good knowledge of how an ArchivesSpace system generally works. We cannot assume always a familiarity with organization-specific workflows and processes. And if a feature request also impacts or is dependent on archival standards, this is something that we should also include in the Jira ticket, in the feature request. The feature request Jira issue is also the place where knowledge about a supported workflow is captured. And this refers to how a specific archival workflow is to be supported by the ArchivesSpace system. It can also include implementation-specific technical details that developers or people who understand the technicality also communicate about in the Jira ticket communication. And we can also see the history of the communication. This is also very important. By just looking at the um, conversation within a Jira ticket, we can see who were the people involved, what were the opinions and different ideas expressed. And of course, hopefully, we can see the final agreed specification, which is very important for everybody involved, of course. Um, by the way, it is something that we notice that in many of our Jira issues, the final agreed details of the feature often are not summarized in the description of the Jira issue. We will see an example of this further. Therefore, it happens that one has to go through the whole conversation to develop a mental model of the feature that can be quite ambiguous. So capturing the communication ensures that the knowledge we acquire while discussing the feature does not slip through our fingers in the future, so that Jira issues can also be the reference of future users that would like to, for example, add new related functionality, or future developers who are fixing a bug on the feature, or future testers who want to verify that the feature is not broken before a new version of ArchivesSpace is released, for example. So I would like to introduce the behavior scenarios as a template for capturing knowledge of a feature request. This is, of course, not our idea. It has been around as a software development practice since many years. A behavior scenario is a story describing how a user interacts with an ArchivesSpace system. It's a narration of a specific interaction scenario between ArchivesSpace users and the system. The story tries to be concrete in the sense that normally requirements can also be formed as abstract statements, but a behavior scenario is usually a concrete example of how people interact in a specific situation, in a specific context with ArchivesSpace. It is also, or it should also not be implementation specific. So there should not be low-level implementation details included in a behavior scenario, such as data structures, servers, databases, and or application architecture mentioned there. Also, no user interface details like buttons, specific forms, fields, etc. It's more about the user intentions and the responses of the system. So it is supposed to be, as they say, just enough and just in time software design, or lightweight examples that provide enough context to start developing the feature. Gherkin, which is also known as a given, when, then syntax, is a language for writing such behavior scenarios. Gherkin scenarios are meant to be short and sound like plain English. Each scenario has this structure of three parts, basically. One part that starts with sentences starting with a keyword given, then followed by sentences starting with the keyword when, and finally sentences starting with the keyword then. Given sentences describe some initial state or context where a user action described in sentences starting with when is referenced. So one or more when sentences describe user actions that trigger reactions or responses or desired outcomes from the system, which are in turn described in sentences starting with the keyword then. So as a bridge between users, developers, and testers, Gherkin is trying to be a plain text language with a simple structure that is intended to be easy enough to learn for non-programmers, while allowing the level of specificity that is required by developers to successfully develop a feature, and also required by testers to test that feature. Let's see an example to make this a bit more concrete. So here we see a scenario line that is expressed in the already used in our Jira feature requests template of as a specific user role, I want to perform an action so that I can fulfill a goal or get to a certain outcome. In this case, as a staff member, I want to log in so that I can access restricted functionality. Already by reading this simple sentence, we get a lot of information. We can see the why of this feature. Why is this specification written? To protect restricted functionality from anonymous users. And we can also see who is the most important stakeholder in this feature. In this case, the staff members who care about protecting this functionality and having access to it only after being logged in. Then we see the steps that we were talking about before of this scenario. Let's start by the last part, which is the then step, where we see actually the outcome that we expect from the system. In this case, that the user is successfully logged in. In order to reach this outcome, there is some user actions that are happening, that are in reference to in this when step and the end starting sentence that follows it. So when the user browses the login form and the user submits their credential, then the user is successfully logged in. At the beginning of this scenario, we see the given step, actually two of them, the given followed by another end sentence, where a certain context is outlined. In this case, that the user has already created a staff account and the user is not logged in yet. So these scenario steps provide the context in these, the givens steps, the events that trigger the responses of the system, the user actions that are events that trigger responses from the system, and the outcomes that happen, basically that the user is successfully logged in. Note that this is not a list of imperative steps, but a short description of a specific reaction of the system to a user action in a specific context. This is what we call a behavior. When we say imperative, we basically mean that this is not a list of low-level steps on the user interface. There is no mentioning here of specific buttons or text fields, etc. But it is more a declarative description in the sense that it describes intentions of the user and responses of the system. Also, it is important to note that this is one scenario that describes a specific behavior. We will expand on this later. Because they are written in plain English, they are inclusive and understood by all the three groups that we were talking before. So behavior scenarios are equally understood by users who propose a feature, by developers who write the code to support the feature, and by testers who test whether the implementation of the feature works as expected. Let's take a deeper look in this Gherkin language and some more of the keywords that comprise it. So starting with the feature keyword, we can have a general description of the feature request that usually can include many such behavior, many concrete behavior scenarios. This feature description is preferably in the form that we already know. So as a persona or as a member of a specific user group, I want to perform an action on the system UI usually, so that an outcome is achieved, a result is fulfilled. In a group of or in a paragraph starting with a background, we can optionally include some more context or the background idea of the feature request. We can also have a sentence starting with a rule keyword that could be a general rule that then can be more specified in a group of specific scenarios, of behavior scenarios. And then in the lower level, we can have the scenario as we saw before. The title of the scenario is usually expressed as a summary of the behavior, again, as many times as in this template of as a group member, I want to perform something so that I achieve something. Each scenario can be comprised of three types of steps: the given steps giving some initial state, the when steps that are referring to user actions, and the then steps that describe the expected outcomes. After each of these given, when, and then steps, we can have one or more sentences starting either with and or but to give additional givens, additional whens, or additional thens, just to avoid this repeating these keywords and making the reading of this scenario even more tedious. Note that there is no or step in this template or in this Gherkin language. And that is because each scenario is a sequence of steps that is describing a specific behavior. So if an or step seems necessary to describe another path in the sequence of events of a scenario, then this is an indication of actually the need for yet another scenario to describe this alternative path. It is important to note also that these given when and then steps are ordered. They must appear in this order and they cannot repeat. This means that a given may not follow a when or a then, and a when may not follow a then. They have to appear in this given when then order. And this is because any single when then pair denotes an individual behavior, and each scenario covers one specific behavior. If more than one when then pairs seem necessary, then this probably means that separate scenarios should be written instead. So each scenario should describe a single behavior. let's talk a little bit more about the step phrasing. So yeah, all the steps have to stay ordered, as we saw before. We need to include as much detail as possible, meaning that for each step, meaning that we should not leave out parts of the step for brevity. So although it sounds tedious to repeat nouns such as the user does this or the user does that on every when step, or the resource is changing this and or whatever other status. Nevertheless, repeating these nouns and making clear to what each step refers to avoids confusion, and it is good to keep doing. And writing all steps in third person is also a good idea. If first person and third person steps mix, scenarios can become confusing. We generally prefer to write steps as a subject predicate action phrase, which can use passive and active voice. But let's be sure to write our scenarios in a way that describes the intended action of the user and the expected result of the system. Using generally present tense for all step types is a good idea to ensure that each step refers to an action that happens during the scenario and not something that should have happened already or will happen at some future time, which can cause confusion. We spoke about this a bit before, that good steps are declarative in that they state user intentions and system responses and stay in this higher level of not describing specific low-level instructions directly referring to the UI, for example. These kind of low-level requirements can be much better outlined with a screen mockup, as we have seen in the previous session. And we have as a practice in our Jira feature requests generally already. This maybe sounds too much theory. Let's take a look at the real world example. I use this ANW504 ticket as an example. This is a feature that we have already implemented in our latest 3.5.0 release. And I would like to make the point that the process of this feature of discussing, implementing, and testing this feature could have been much smoother if some behavior scenarios like in this language that I have been talking about were included early on in the discussion. Let's take a look at the ticket. Let me see if I can bring it up here. Yes. So here we can see that the issue is super old. It was created in 2012, and it was finally moved to ready for implementation at some point in October of 2022, which practically like 10 years later. So we would like to make the point that probably it would get faster prioritized if the requirements were more clear or became clearer sooner. Still, another point that I would like to show is that still until today, this issue description is almost empty. There is just a small sentence here that actually is wrong because the final agreed specification of this ticket does not refer to what this sentence defines, that it will impact what gets returned in search results, browse results, etc. because actually this feature refers to something that is only viewable on the staff UI, on the edit and view or edit and show views for resources, and the mark XML exports of the resources. So, and so my point is that if we imagine somebody who would need to test this feature because of a bug that appears some point in the future, or so that tester would have to go through this whole conversation and form again from the beginning some kind of mental model of what was the final agreed specification or the expected behavior of the system, which would probably be quite unambiguous. And we can see that at some point in the conversation, there was such an example of somebody who was testing this feature, and it was not so clear to them that actually there was no changes were expected on the public user interface. And not only that, but also one of our developers actually did implement a way to show a change in the public user interface because somehow it made sense. Although actually it was agreed that it shouldn't, there shouldn't be such a change on the public user interface because it would cause unnecessary confusion. This was so this code was actually reverted in our repository. I am talking about this and taking this issue as an example because there are many other such issues, and I am sure many of you have already some examples in your mind where the process of coming to an agreement about a specific feature involves, as expected, a lot of different opinions, a lot of different viewpoints, different understandings of the whole thing, and finally comes to a certain agreement, which is not so much documented or not clearly documented in the Jira issue. And in the following slides, I would like to present some behavior scenarios that could contribute to clarifying this specific feature and smoothing the process of agreeing upon how the system should behave, of implementing this feature, and also the process of verifying that it was actually implemented correctly, the testing of the feature. Let me go back to... So let's talk a little bit more about this feature declaration or the slight change that I would propose to it. Basically, I would just add one more part, that part that is missing in the Jira title of this issue. And then the complete feature declaration would read as an archivist, I want to mark none or exactly one agent link of a resource or digital object or accession, etc., or as primary, so that the primary agent appears as a 100 filled-in mark XML exports. By just adding this, so that part here, we already make a clear indication of where this should appear, and although not really making it explicit, we probably imply that it shouldn't appear anywhere else. Of course, this is not just clear by this description. That is why we need more requirements and more text in this. So another part that could be added would be a background group of sentences or paragraph that could read as such, so that the primary agent, the agent link that was labeled as primary, should for a specific resource, should appear as a 100 field in the mark XML exports for that resource. It should not be viewable anywhere in the public user interface. And on the staff user interface, it should only be viewable on the edit and show views of a resource. Then we could add some more specific scenarios. In this case, again, I would like to stress the fact that these scenarios are not abstract descriptions of the requirement, but more concrete and specific stories about user and system interactions in a specific context. So let's read this scenario. As a staff user or as an archivist, that could also be the case, I want to mark exactly one agent as a primary on a resource so that it appears as primary on the edit view of the staff user interface. So given the user opens the edit form of a resource on a staff user interface, and the resource has 3 agent links, 2 creators and 1 subject. In this step also, we have a very specific outline of the context. And the second agent link is already marked as primary. Now comes the user actions. So when the user marks the first agent as primary, then the system should react so that then the second agent does not appear as primary anymore, and the first agent appears marked as primary. So, to make a long story short, this refers to the fact that we can only have one specific agent link marked as primary, and doing this in a very concrete scenario, in a very concrete narration of a specific user interaction with an ArchivesSpace system. Note also that these given steps are not describing the complete steps of how to open the edit form of a resource in a detailed imperative step-by-step fashion, but it is describing only the conditions of this behavior, only including the relevant points that the resource has 3 agent links, that the second agent link is already marked as primary. Then this when describes the relevant action of the user, and then comes the expected response of the ArchivesSpace system. So this scenario is very concrete, describes a very specific case of a resource with 3 agents, etc., and not trying to be an abstract generic description of the feature. Let's take a look at another scenario that could also be included. So, as a staff user, I want to see the primary agent of a resource on the show view of the resource on the staff user interface, so that it becomes clear that there is a primary agent defined for that resource. So given a staff user marks a specific agent link as primary on a resource, this is a very abstract description of what the precondition of this scenario is, but which actually just refers to the necessarily relevant details for this scenario. That, which basically is that a specific agent link is marked as primary for that resource. So given this precondition, when the user opens the show view for that resource on the staff user interface, then the system responds so that the agent link is marked as primary. That's it. That's a very simple usage scenario again. That nevertheless provides a lot of information of how this should appear on the show view of the staff user interface. And another third scenario that I would propose. So as an archivist, I want to see a 100 field for the primary agent in the mark XML export of a resource. So given the user opens the edit form of a resource on the staff user interface, and the resource has 3 agent links, in this example, 2 creators and 1 subject, and the second agent link is already marked as primary, when the user downloads a mark XML export of that resource, then there should be a 100 type field appearing in the mark XML export for that primary agent link. Notice that there is no effort to describe how the user downloads a mark XML export of that resource. All this could be part of a screen mockup that we talked about. And the focus is on the behavior, not so much on the UI or the implementation details. I have prepared another, this I would skip this for now because I see we don't have so much time and I would love to get in a conversation phase of this session soon. I would like to mention that we have updated some of our wiki pages, the ones that are referring to how to request a new feature. And we have also added a wiki page describing these behavior scenarios and more or less this information that I have in this presentation for people who are interested to dive deeper. There is also some more, there's a book that I have mentioned here and some links to articles that are relevant. Thank you very much for your attention. I know this is quite a lot of information. I would be happy to receive more questions, or please feel free to get in touch to us in archivespace@liasis.org.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Thimios. And congratulations on your first ArchivesSpace presentation at a forum. Hopefully there will be many more to come. This was really helpful. And I would like to say, just point out that wiki documentation that Thimios highlighted. We have updated our instructions on how to request a new feature and how to report a bug, as well as creating that new page that explains these behavior scenarios in a little more depth. I think that it is wonderful, the work that Thimios has already put in, and I really recommend reviewing those before submitting feature requests so that they can be more successful, like he said. If you have any questions, please do drop them into the Q&A. We do have one question, Thimios, from Lauren. Should we create a ticket for each scenario, even if the scenarios are related to one another, like the primary agent example that you provided?
That's a very good question. Actually, I would imagine behavior scenarios as stories that could be included in the Jira issue of a specific feature request. So normally I would propose that we include multiple such user scenarios in a single Jira issue, in a single feature request. And this is actually, maybe I can present this, something that I have tried to do in this ticket here, where in the 504 ticket that I was talking about, I tried to I added some some user scenarios. How many? 3, like 5 of them within this issue. Normally, I would expect these user scenarios not to appear as a comment in the Jira issue, or better said, they could be first appearing as a comment in the Jira issue, but finally, it could be great if they would land in the description field of this of a ticket once people involved in the conversation have agreed on them. in this way, a future reviewer of this Jira issue could reference to those scenarios easily just by reading the description and not going through the whole conversation. Yeah, I
Thank you.
hope I have answered. Yeah.
Yeah, Lauren says that makes sense to me to include the scenarios in the same feature request. Thanks. Katerina says, thanks for demystifying Jira requests. Any other questions for Thimios? I have a question that came to me directly. Does that mean it is for the dev pri to move scenarios into the description or for the creator of the ticket to do so?
Wow, that's a very good question. I would love to see everybody feeling prone to describe their idea of how the system should behave in the context of a specific feature as a user scenario. And in the end, I would love I think it would be very helpful for all of us if everybody feel free to edit the description of the ticket once there is an agreement reached by the people involved. Now, the exact moment or the procedure for this kind of agreement, I'm not sure how this could be something that we should discuss. I mean, should it be a member of the DevBright team or any user who has access to our Jira system? I would love to have it as democratic as possible and as open as possible. But since I am not the one who really should take this kind of decision, I would keep this question and discuss it in a bigger circle.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that's a bigger question about how to come to decisions, though I think that having these behavior scenarios and these use cases in the ticket, it's so helpful because it helps make those decisions and make those decisions faster and make those decisions actionable. So if you have a scenario, please do put it in a ticket. Don't be shy. And then there's also larger questions around Jira, like permissions and things, but comment on those tickets for sure. And we can talk about this as a group later. Any other questions for Thimios? I'm speaking slowly. I know that we are at that time, so there may not be any more, but I'm speaking slowly in case anyone has a last minute thought. In the meantime, I am very excited to say I think Confluence is back up, so you can review the agenda for our next two sessions this afternoon and tomorrow if you'd like. If you haven't had a chance to register for either of those, please do feel free and we can get you approved for those. In the meantime, I will say thank you to Thimios. Thank you to all of our presenters for the first session of the Virtual Member Forum. It has been great. Thank you everyone for sticking with us, even through some technical complications. And I look forward to seeing you all again in 2 hours. Thank you, everyone.